presentations. This next gentleman has written 2 books on the Kennedy assassination, Destiny Betrayed back in 1992, the first positive, I guess, reappraisal of the Jim Garrison investigation in a generation. The assassinations, analyzing the murders of RFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and of course devoted mainly to the AAF, or the Review Board documents. And he, of course, provided commentary on a special section, or a special presentation on the JFK Oliver Stone movie. And I can't thank him enough for all of the reviews that he writes and posts, including the long review of Doug Horne's books. I guess we could probably, from what I've read of this particular series of reviews, could probably subtitle it "Grabbing the Bull, Expletive Deleted by the Horn." Ladies and gentlemen, would you please make welcome Mr. Jim DiEugenio.
I'd rather reserve that grabbing the bull for my next Bugliosi review. But there's too much bull to grab in one handful.
I do want royalties, by the way.
Before I get started, I was talking to Bill Simpich yesterday, and a couple of people have mentioned this Man in Mexico photograph. The Man in Mexico photograph, he has been identified, and it's in the Lopez report. All right? And the significance of that is that Lopez and Hardaway proved, I think beyond a reasonable doubt, that Ann Goodpasture knew who he was before she sent the picture. And in other words, it was deliberately meant to mislead. Okay? And the reason she did it is because it came much closer to matching the false description of Oswald, the 6-foot guy with the athletic build. Okay? And that's why she did it. And they proved that she even manipulated the record in order to say the photograph was taken on a certain day, which it was not. Okay? But remember, as Bugliosi says, the Lopez report is a giant dub. Okay? All right, the topic of my talk today is historical revisionism and the JFK case. Why did I choose that title? Well, first of all, because I have an MA in history, and I was seriously thinking of a PhD, but I decided not to. And also because I think that there's, a problem that's continually plagued the JFK research community almost from the beginning. That is, as Jim Garrison once noted in his book, the issue of the false sponsors, okay, the diversions, okay. And in the last few months, we have done several reviews by myself and Seamus Coogan that have, I guess you would call, raised some controversy in the field on works by people like John Hankey and Russ Baker and Seamus's article about Alex Jones. I was really a bit surprised at the intensity of this reaction. Okay, I mean, especially the stuff about Baker's book. So I tried to patiently answer each question about this who emailed me in. And I tried to also answer this on Len's show, Black Hawk Radio. But it's one of the things that convinced me to deliver this talk. Purely speaking, revisionism means that you draw a reinterpretation of some kind of historical event in such a way that it alters the traditional view of that event, which historians have handed down from generation to generation. See, one of the things that people don't understand about academia and historians in general is that there's almost as much pressure to conform in academia as there is in the mainstream press, for a lot of different reasons, which I won't go into here. Okay, but this pressure does exist. And it's usually the more traditional people, like say Ambrose or McCullough, who get the career advancement. All right? If you toe the line, you get the advancement. If you don't toe the line, you become a figure of controversy. All right? And, there's many examples of revisionism that you can go back, going all the way back to Spengler's Decline of the West, which changed the way we looked at certain concepts. All right? Another example of revisionism, of course, would be Jim Hogan's brilliant and revolutionary book about Watergate's secret agenda, which completely altered, at least a lot, well, my view and many others' view, of what happened, and exposed the Washington Post and Bob Woodward to be at best propagandists, at worst, well, I won't go further than that. Now, in this field, I guess the best example of historical revisionism is John Newman's masterful book, JFK in Vietnam. And that is a book whose effects in the literature about Vietnam are still being felt to this day. He ushered in a whole new small bookshelf of people who followed him, who now see the prime event in the expansion of the Vietnam War as the assassination of President Kennedy. And I'm sure you're familiar with this Gordon Goldstein's book, Lessons in Disaster, David Kaiser's book, American Tragedy, the Howard Jones book, Death of a Generation. These have all essentially virtual JFK. And by the way, I should say that John, although you won't see his name in McNamara's book, was responsible for McNamara's book. All right, McNamara called him in and interviewed him several times. And I said, John, why does a guy who was there have to interview you? And he said, well, he has a really bad memory. And I said, how could you have a bad memory? Because, Jim, if you're responsible for the death of 2 million people, you have a hard time remembering it too. Okay? So, he's also responsible, in a way, in retrospect. Now, what defines the concept of revisionism is, of course, tradition. In the subject of Vietnam, the traditional way to look at that was mapped out by David Halberstam's book, The Best and the Brightest, which tried to depict that conflict as an inevitable tragedy, one that America really could not avoid. John Newman's book changed that, and it made the very forceful argument that, yes, Vietnam could have been avoided if President Kennedy hadn't been assassinated. Or as John once said to Warren Hinkle, quote, "Show me Kennedy's plan for winning the war and I'll believe you." Right? Well, LBJ had one in 4 months after taking office. Kennedy never developed one in 3 years. So John's book superseded and kind of made the best, if you ask me, it made the best and the brightest into kind of historical artifact, something to look back on, not forward to. All right, now, but the reason John's book did that is, number one, it clearly recognized a tradition that it was countering, number one. Number two, it clearly delineated the difference between the two policies. Number three, it clearly showed how fast the switch occurred. And by the way, if you read his book, how fast did the switch occur? In 48 hours. Okay? All right, number four, it introduced convincing new evidence to prove his thesis. And number five, it showed where there had been indications in the past that this had been the case, and other people had overlooked. All right, now, it is not easy to write historical revisionism that sticks. That is why John took 10 years to write his book. Because John's book was so convincing, was so well done, I think we're all the better for it. I think it's always good when you clear up mythology from the past. Oh, by the way, how many people know that Lessons in Disaster was passed around the Obama administration before the decision to go into Afghanistan was made? Yeah, it was. The guys who didn't want to go passed that book around. Obviously, it didn't work, but, All right. And so for me, JFK in Vietnam is a model, of first-class historical scholarship in search of the true facts about a controversial subject. Now, I mentioned the word tradition previously and how revisionism is based upon tradition, but also something that finds its roots in a part of a tradition that was overlooked. All right? So to make this point as soundly as I can, my minor in college was English, and one of my favorite critics was T.S. Eliot. And he wrote a book, or rather an essay, called Tradition and the Individual Talent, in which he argued that it was all right to be revolutionary, it was all right to find new styles to express yourself, but when it came time to evaluating the work of art, you had to place it in a historical context. You had to explain to this person where this thing came from, or you weren't a very good critic. All right, and so I think that kind of parallel applies to this case. Well, is the proper background to explain this subject that I'm going to address today. You know, for from the near beginning of the Kennedy assassination, there had been attempts to be novel, to be daring, to be revolutionary, in order to somehow explain something important that everybody missed, or at times to even explain what actually happened in Dealey Plaza. You know, some of these attempts have just been misguided. Some of them I don't think have been very innocent. Okay, but they have been attempts, in my view, to mislead and confuse and to muddy the waters. Now, since someone asked about Farewell America, that's what I'm first going to talk about. Farewell America was introduced, supposedly done by French intelligence at the time of the Jim Garrison investigation, and was actually mailed to his office. And I did a long review of this book on Rich De La Rosa's website. If you haven't read the book, in short, it's the first book to put forward in any kind of detailed and long way this whole idea of a Texas connection. He calls it the committee, all right, that of these Texas billionaires or millionaires, whatever you want to call it, you know, who somehow sponsored the Kennedy assassination. And what's very interesting about the book is the first half of the book does not tell you about that. It's in the second half of the book that he brings this in. And the first half of the book is actually pretty good. It's the second half of the book that is really sketchy and shady and almost mystical. Okay? You know, so when I was analyzing this, I said, I believe the first half of the book is a setup to gull you in the second half of the book. Well, Garrison was actually really tantalized by the book. All right? And so what happened is, he, as a good investigator does, he did everything he could to find out where it came from. So I interviewed Lou Ivon and Harold Weisberg about this thing, since they were part of the investigation, to find out where this thing came from. Now, the titular author of the book, I mean, everybody knows James Hepburn is not really a person. Okay, he's the name of the guy in the book. Okay, James Hepburn's real name was Herbie Lamar. All right, and so Garrison found this guy, brought him down to New Orleans, and interviewed him several times. It turns out Herbie Lamar is not the guy who wrote the book. All right, so this gets to be a shell inside of a shell inside of a shell, finding out the mystery of who really wrote this book. Well, what happened is that finally, and Garrison, you know, one of the real tragedies of this case is that it's so hard to find Garrison's files, you know. So I didn't find the actual files, but I actually found a summary sheet of his investigation of Farewell America, all right? And it turned out that the guy who really wrote the book is a guy nobody ever heard of, Philippe DiEugenio. Philippe DiEugenio was a former agent of the SDECE, which is French intelligence. He had been kicked out of French intelligence because he was suspected of being a double agent. All right? Does anybody know who he was a double agent for?
Angleton?
James Angleton. Okay? And so it turned out that DiEugenio actually supervised the writing of Farewell America. Now, of course, in 1968, very few people knew that James Angleton was running Oswald. All right? But if Garrison would have known that, he probably would have arrested Herbie Lamar. All right? So this is the first example of what I call these diversions, you know, that enter the JFK case. And by the way, to this day, people swear by this book, Farewell America, without knowing it was written as a project of James Angleton. You know? Now, the second book, oh, by the way, Ivon got so mad at this Herbie Lamar for lying to him that he actually physically threw him out of Garrison's office. All right? All right. The second book I studied in this regard is not really a book, and contrary to its title, it's not really a document. It's really a long essay, supposedly written by two Secret Service agents and sent to some Texas lawyer. The proper title is called Nomenclature of an Assassination Cabal, popularly known as a Torbett document, after the lawyer whose office it was sent to. And by the way, when I first started coming to these things back in When was the first ASK conference? 1991? Yeah, it was 1991. Everybody had this thing. Everybody had this Torbett document. It was really hot. Okay, the whole so-called secret of the assassination was supposed to be, yeah, don't read any books. Here it is. All right? So I also did an extended analysis of this on Rich's website. And I came to the same conclusion I did with Farewell America, that it was pure bunk. It's pure disinformation. Except it's a different form of disinformation. You know, if you closely examine the Torbett essay, all right, you will notice something quite odd. It accuses everybody and their mother of being involved in the Kennedy assassination. Okay? The Pentagon, the Mafia, the FBI, the DIA, something called DISC, you know, which is not a CD, all right? LBJ, Texas millionaires, everybody except the CIA. Everybody except the CIA is in this document. You know? So, in fact, when it discusses somebody who is a CIA agent, like Clay Shaw, it doesn't call him a CIA agent. It calls him a military intelligence agent. You know, which is true, but only for 4 years. After Shaw got out of the military, he became a CIA agent for a long, long time. You know? Now, many of the footnotes, and by the way, this is a dead giveaway. This, for anybody who knows Garrison stuff, which very few people do, this is a dead giveaway about the Torbett document. If you read the footnotes, whenever he says something very controversial or outlandish, what does the footnote say? Files of the New Orleans DA. Well, I'm one of the very few people who has looked through the files in New Orleans, and I can tell you this is complete crap. This stuff is not in there, at least not the stuff that I've seen. Okay, so to me, this is a dead giveaway to the Torbett document. All right? Now, what was the purpose of these two disinformation tracks? In my opinion, they both have to do with the destruction of Jim Garrison. The first part, I believe, was part of the CIA's campaign, directed out of Angleton's office, to mislead Garrison and send him down a wrong trail. And by the way, the effort out of Angleton's office to crush Garrison was quite extensive. You know, it started quite early in 1967 when they had the first meeting, in which I think it's Ray Roca, who says if we don't do anything about this guy, Clay Shaw is going to be convicted. It actually says that in black and white in the CIA document. You'll see it on the ABC special next week. All right? And the second nomenclature of assassination cabal, I believe, was meant to muddy the waters in the wake of Garrison's investigation by deliberately lying about the contents of his files. And it was meant to do two things. Number one, to imply that the CIA was not actually involved in the case. And number two, to throw out a whole laundry list of other suspects, including, if you can believe it, but it's there, Roy Cohn was somehow involved in the Kennedy assassination. I mean, Roy Cohn did a lot of awful things. I've never seen anything that implicates him in the Kennedy case. You know? Now, the unfortunate thing about nomenclature of assassination cabal is this, that it succeeded. Okay? That essay, like I said, became the holy grail for a lot of people, you know, in the JFK community. And it stayed that way for quite a long time. Secondly, it did provide a rather long list, myriad list, of other suspects that people eagerly took up after. You know? And I actually think you can find the influence of nomenclature in a few writers, including Peter Dale Scott. Now, the next diversionary tactic, I believe, was performed by Bob Blakey. You know, if you read Fonzie's excellent book, The Last Investigation, you will see that he says, from up close and personal, that Blakey's object was to impress upon the collective imagination of America the influence of the mob in Kennedy's death. And he spared no effort or opportunity to do so. And again, unfortunately, he was successful. You know, because he had a platform and a big name, the influence of Bob Blakey became rather difficult to overstate. We got these books by Dan Moldea, you know, John Davis. Jonathan Whitney did a PBS special. You know, several other writers like Mark North, okay, continued to write in this vein. You know, topped off by Frank Pagano. and Tom Hartman and Lamar Waldron. You know, but today, the really odd thing is if you look at the declassified files of the House Select Committee, you can see just how empty of real evidence Blakey had in this category, and how he actually reversed the evidentiary trail behind people like Guy Bannister and Davis Ferry in order to give his theory a viability it really doesn't have on its own. Now this brings us to the present, or at least contemporary times. You know, due to Stone's movie, over 1 million or 2 million pages of documents have now been declassified. And Probe was one of the very few publications that actually did a lot of work trying to get these new documents out. And there have been a lot of good books based upon these documents, like Breach of Trust, Let Justice Be Done, JFK and the Unspeakable, are just a few. Now, in light of these books, let us return to the idea of tradition. These books, I believe, follow in that line. That is, they build upon a foundation that has already been established, a foundation of good information. And they use this information in its purest state without spinning it through a blender. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be obedient to any kind of tradition. But if you break away from that tradition, you have to have a solid basis to do it with. You know, the old Carl Sagan line, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. If not, it's just a claim. And in its worst state, it's just cheap sensationalism. Right? So let us take up 3 instances of revisionism of recent vintage in the JFK case. In order, they will be Family of Secrets, Ultimate Sacrifice, and the film JFK 2, now called Dark Legacy. Then I'm briefly going to consider a man who provides a megaphone for some of this stuff, Alex Jones, and briefly mention a comparison of him with the other alternative we have today, the so-called liberal blogosphere. Like I said, no review I wrote did I meet with more vocal and violent disagreement than my critique of Baker's book. You know, I was even accused of covering up for George Bush. Okay? All right? Which to me is like out of left field. I mean, I think George Bush should be in jail, but not for what Baker wrote about. He should be in jail for his role in the Iran-Contra affair, the October surprise, and all this stuff that they didn't get to, like the drug running and his mini Operation Phoenix against the Sandinistas. So to say that I'm covering up for George Bush is just ridiculous, you know? But that's how attached people got to Family of Secrets, you know? So since I did not see how Baker had in any way proven his case in that regard, I didn't understand the logic of this charge, you know? In fact, I felt that Baker never proved any of the sensational charges against Bush 41. You know, for instance, and this was one error in the book that I really can't believe Baker made, and that nobody picked up on. In the book, it says that George Bush was enlisted into Mongoose in the late 1950s. Now, anybody who knows anything about this case knows that Mongoose didn't start until 1962, when they sent Shockley down to Jam Lane. So how could nobody notice that? Mongoose did not begin under Eisenhower. You know, it began as a reaction to the failure of the Bay of Pigs under Kennedy. All right? Now, you can say the Bay of Pigs started under Eisenhower, but that's not Mongoose. And I had all these people trying to get that point. We'll see he was part of the Bay of Pigs. We'll see he was part of the assassination. Look, you can go for continuity in any different ways, but to me, that's just screwing things up. If we're ever going to be precise about this case, we have to know what the hell we're talking about. Mongoose was Mongoose. Mongoose was not the Bay of Pigs. All right? You know, and Baker's evidence in regard to Bush's alleged role in the Kennedy's assassination, I thought was pretty much the same quality. Barbara Bush writing a letter to her family about hearing about JFK's death at the hairdresser. Okay? This somehow became a cover story devised later to disguise what? I don't know. I mean, was Baker saying Barbara Bush was involved? You know? George de Mohrenschaudt knew Bush from his oil geology days. The fact that when de Mohrenschaudt was interviewed by the CIA before he went to Haiti, and did not tell him about his acquaintance with Oswald or the upcoming coup attempt in Haiti, this somehow became suspicious. As if DiEugenio was supposed to tell these guys about his role as escorting Oswald around or the upcoming coup. In my opinion, DiEugenio didn't even know what he was doing with Oswald. All right? And he didn't know until after the fact. Bush told the FBI he would be staying in Dallas overnight on the 22nd, and this was on the 21st, he said that. He ended up not doing so. Again, family secrets just become suspicious. If I'm campaigning for the Senate, I'm trying to win this race, why would you stay in Dallas on the 22nd after what happened in Dean Plaza? Do you really think anyone's going to pay attention to you? Okay? Now, I don't even want to talk about what Baker did with the Thomas Perot story. Suffice it to say that what he appears to have done is embellish it and to leave out key points in order to make it something that it's not. That is, Bush's assistant providing some kind of alibi, which Perot didn't need because he already had an alibi. You know, and in my view, family secrets is like this throughout, except for one part. The good part of the book is a part where he talks about Bush 43 and the Texas Air National Guard. That is a good part and valuable part of the book. But the rest of it, which is about 90% of the book, I think is essentially journalistic gymnastics to disguise a simple fact, that he has no evidence to implicate Bush in the JFK case. All right, let's go to Ultimate Sacrifice. Now, this is a book that I was not even going to review, all right? But Jim Douglas called me out and asked me to. So, when you write a book like JFK and the Unspeakable, you have my ear, all right? Now, the problems I have with this book were kind of simple. You know, why would Kennedy plan an invasion of Cuba for the fall of 1963 when he would not invade the island during the disaster of Bay of Pigs? Or when he was under immense pressure to do so? Or during the missile crisis when he was even under more immense pressure to do so? And further, in 1963, if you read the Douglas book, Kennedy had been working for about 11 months on developing a détente with Castro, something which, of course, Fidel was almost overjoyed about, saying that Kennedy would now go down in history as the greatest president since Lincoln. You know, if you weren't going to invade Cuba under that kind of pressure, then it wasn't going to happen. Another thing I didn't understand is how this invasion was going to occur in 2 weeks. Secretary of Defense Bob McNamara didn't know about it, but Jack Ruby did. When was Kennedy going to tell McNamara? The morning of? Right? Then, of course, there were these meetings that he discusses, in which somehow Richard Helms knew about the invasion, but McNamara did not. You know? But then if Helms knew about it, why did he try and sucker Kennedy with this fake arms case, which he says the CIA found in Venezuela, only 12 days before this so-called C Day was going to happen, which I didn't think made any sense at all. But then again, why would the mob try and kill Kennedy or kill Kennedy, and then probably eliminate their last chance to get back their casinos in Cuba? That's another thing I didn't think was explained. All right? And but let me conclude in a comparison between Baker and Ultimate Sacrifice. And like I said, I thought Baker really jumbled up the whole Thomas Perot story. The reason that Jim Douglas wanted me to read Ultimate Sacrifice, because he had a copy of Edwin Black's absolutely remarkable, fantastic essay, first published in the Chicago Reader in 1975. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? The plot to kill Kennedy in Chicago. It's on Len's website, okay? And it's an absolutely stunning piece of work about the Chicago. In fact, I think it was the only long essay ever written about the Chicago plot at that time, all right? So Jim actually went to Chicago and he hunted this thing down in the basement of some obscure library, all right? And he sent it to me. And so, of course, you know, I read it. And then I compared what was in Ultimate Sacrifice to what was in the essay. And I was really, you know, it's really kind of surprising. You know, I guess the most grievous exception was the fact that Hartman and Waldron left out what I thought was a bombshell in the Black essay. Namely, that the code name of the informant who tipped off the Secret Service about the plot was Lee. that's not important enough to mention. They also left out the character of Thomas Belay, who was the designated patsy in the Chicago plot. And if you don't know, the resemblances between Oswald and Thomas Belay are very, very close. And in fact, if the Secret Service had not covered up the Chicago plot, I believe the Dallas assassination would not have happened because Belay so much resembled Oswald, down to being a former Marine who had been working with Cuban exiles, who had some antisocial tendencies, etc. Because I think Oswald would have been picked up in advance. And also, because the actual design of the plot was so much like what happened in Dallas, I believe the motorcade route would have been altered. In other words, what happened in Dallas would not have happened, okay, if the Chicago plot had not been covered up. That's how good Black Sisse is. And if you haven't read JFK and the Unspeakable, Jim actually went up there. You know, and he said he actually went to the place where Belay was working. And there's very little difference between that particular scene and what happened in Dealey Plaza. Right? And of course, if Abraham Bolden had not been falsely imprisoned, his testimony, I believe, would have sunk the Warren Commission. And I believe that's why he was falsely accused and placed in jail. All right, now let's go to John Hankey's Dark Legacy, formerly called JFK 2. This film has so many problems, I could be up here for 2 or 3 hours, and everybody would be throwing tomatoes at me by the end. You know, it's impossible to correct them all. But suffice it to say that when you say that Delphine Roberts saw Oswald at the Lake Pontchartrain training camp, you didn't do your homework. All right? When you say that somehow Prescott Bush was actually running the CIA when Allen Dulles was its director, then you haven't studied any histories of the CIA, okay, or any biographies of Allen Dulles. All right? You know, if there's one person who created the CIA, as we know it, it's Allen Dulles. And if there's one person who revolutionized the CIA, once he was a director, it was Allen Dulles. All right? You know, when you have Howard Hunt working for Nixon in the White House, when he was actually sent there as a CIA agent to overthrow the Nixon presidency, then you haven't read Secret Agenda. You know? And when you say that the code name of the Bay of Pigs, which was Operation Zapata, was named after some boat, then you obviously have not read any of the studies of the Bay of Pigs, because the peninsula right next to the Bay of Pigs was called Zapata Peninsula. Okay? And the whole film is like that. So, what does Hankey have on George Bush? Well, skull and bones, and he milks that for all it's worth. And then he tries to get every last drop out of the famous Hoover Memorandum, written about by Joseph McBride in The Nation back in 1988. But at the same time, he does something really, really odd. He tries to make J. Edgar Hoover into some hero and some kind of crack investigator. You know why? Because Hoover discovered that some bank Prescott Bush was associated with was sending funds to the Third Reich. Well, if you counted every trade company and every business and every bank that did business with the Third Reich leading up to 1941, you'd have about half the millionaires in this country under arrest. Okay? And those two facts lead to one of the most unbelievable, over-the-top climaxes in both film history and JFK assassination history, when George Bush goes into Hoover's office with some Cuban thugs and threatens him with a poison flechette gun. Why? I don't know. But it makes for some humorous theater of the absurd, which is up there with Ionesco. Now that I summarized, some of the dubious worth of these works, let me go back to my original point. All right? New and original work must be judged by the standards of the past. Okay? Things that have been established by fact, and which are essentially not arguable. All right? If not, then the new work, and this is what Elliot was talking about, then it exists in a vacuum. Which in my view these works do. They exist in some netherworld. All right? And, no one ever has said anything that I know, and I've read, I think, as many books as anybody else, all right, about the involvement of George Bush in the Kennedy assassination prior to the publication of the McBride articles? Does anybody know? I mean, and that is quite a long period of time. That's 25 years. And somehow everybody overlooked this? Sylvia Maher didn't know this? Harold Weisberg didn't know this? George Michael Levica didn't know this? Jim Lazar didn't know this? All right? Now, I mean, who had postulated a mob plot based on animal before ultimate sacrifice? And like I said, where there is an extraordinary claim, there has to be extraordinary evidence. And in my view, it's no surprise that one of the backers of Hankey and Baker is Alex Jones. Because if you listen to Alex Jones, he knows very little about the JFK case. All right? I mean, this is a guy who fell for Barr McClellan's book, to the point that he once said that JFK had not been killed in the kill zone, LBJ was ready to call in a hit team via helicopters to finish the job. You know, which of course is kind of ridiculous. And it's the kind of thing that makes us look silly. See, and one of the problems I perceive in this regard is that the critical community has a kind of inferiority complex, which I think is understandable. Because we've been marginalized by the mainstream media, been ridiculed by people like Posner, Epstein, and Bugliosi. And therefore, we underestimate or don't understand the real value of the achievements that we have made. Because if you take a look in the face of the opposition, they're quite amazing. I mean, just consider this. I mean, by 1967, the Warren Commission was dead and buried. And this was done by people like individual citizens. You know, like Tink Thompson and Sylvia Maher and Mark Lane, you know, and Weisberg, you know, the chicken farmer, you know, did what the Warren Commission could not do. You know, that's quite, I mean, Sylvia Maher, it's an amazing achievement, actually did a subject index to the Warren Commission on people before computers. That's 19,000 pages. You know? You know, Jim Garrison exposed the prime suspect in the case, the CIA. And he exposed Oswald for what he was, which was an agent provocateur. And he revealed this whole kind of New Orleans underworld, this network that was manipulating Oswald in the summer of 1963. You know, later people have exposed the Mexico City Charade. You know, the obviously curtailed autopsy. The roles of people like Ruth and Michael Payne, and those of people like David Phillips and Jim Angleton. All right? And make no mistake, the Warren Commission knew precisely what it was doing. How many people have heard of Allen Dulles' meeting with Harry Truman in '64? Okay, not very many people. All right, so this is new. Everyone knows that Truman wrote an article for the Washington Post about, I think it was in December of 1963, sorrowfully lamenting what the CIA had become, and that the CIA had become something he never envisioned when he went ahead and signed the documents to make it into a reality. Well, he got a lot of praise for this, but there was one person who didn't like the article. And this one person happened to be on the Warren Commission at the time. Right? And his name was Allen Dulles. And Allen Dulles went out to visit Truman in Missouri, I think in April of 1964. And he had about a half-hour conversation. He had two of his assistants with him. He told them to go outside and watch traffic. And he went into Truman's living room. And he tried to convince him that what he said was wrong. That somehow he did envision overthrowing our Benz. That he did envision overthrowing Mossadegh. I almost want to add that he did envision killing Kennedy. You know, but we won't. All right, so, well, the timing of the essay is very interesting. Because although it was published on December 22nd, or December 21st, he started working on it on December the 1st, 9 days after the assassination. You know? I ask you, coincidence or conspiracy? Right? So, Dulles tried to talk him out of this, you know? And he actually wrote a memo on this, where he actually said that Truman had reconsidered his position. Well, this, of course, is nothing but BS, because if he would have reconsidered his position, Dulles would not have written a letter to the CIA saying, I want Helms, I want 4 other people, maybe McComb, to go out and talk to this guy. And Truman would not have written a letter to Look magazine saying that the Thomas Wise excerpt in the summer of 1964 did not tell the whole story about how bad the CIA had become. Okay? But the really interesting thing about this visit is that as Dulles is leaving, one of the last things he says to Truman is, you know, those articles by people like Starnes and Arthur Kroc about the CIA somehow battling Kennedy over Vietnam, you know, Kennedy denied those before he died. This was an absolutely stunning statement, because Truman didn't bring it up, Dulles did. All right? And it's more BS. Kennedy never denied. In fact, John Newman thinks he was a source for those articles. All right? But for somebody on the Warren Commission to bring that up at that early, because nobody had connected those dots in April of 1964. So how did Dulles connect them? All right? So that's, and in my opinion, that crystallizes just how bad, to have this guy in the Warren Commission is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. All right, so this stuff that I talked about, to me, this kind of stuff is real evidence. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you can submit to a prosecutor. I mean, David Ferry looking for his pictures with Oswald on the evening of November 24th, going around to certain houses of people who were in the CAP with him and Oswald. Do you have any pictures? And the guy's not there, he asks his wife to look through his things. Do you have that picture of me and Oswald? All right? Okay. Or Clay Shaw calling Dean Andrews to defend Oswald on the 23rd. Ruth Payne, I don't know how many people know this, because I didn't know this until Armstrong's book. The Imperial Reflex camera was not found by the Dallas police in either investigation of Ruth Payne's home. All right? There were 3 cameras found. None of them was the Imperial Reflex camera. All right? So how did the Imperial Reflex camera come into evidence? Well, how did everything, Saw's law, come into evidence? Ruth Payne miraculously found his camera 9 days later. But guess what? She doesn't give it to the FBI. She doesn't give it to the Dallas police. She gives it to Robert Oswald. Why? Because Marina's going to be going over there later. And she can have a good look at this camera and replenish her memory. And then she changes her story. And says, oh no, it was an Imperial Reflex camera. Even though how many people know this? When the House Select Committee interviewed Marina Oswald, they tested her on this Imperial Reflex camera. They asked her a very simple question. When you use this camera, how did you use it? Did you raise it up to your eye, or did you look at it down in your waist? Because if you're old enough now, I know about these cameras that you actually have at your waist, and you looked at the viewfinder like this. All right? In this case, you looked at the viewfinder like this. Marina says she had it up to her eye. How could you possibly not remember something like that? But she didn't. And this is why the people on the House Select, not Blakey, because everybody knows Blakey and Billings rewrote the report after everybody was gone. This is why they said, we have some real problems with this woman. And they wrote a 29-page essay on the contradictions of Marina Oswald and why she was not a credible witness, especially in the Walker shooting. All right? John Stringer. Here's some more real evidence. I've taken some shots at Duckhorn's book, all right? But I think there's some stuff of real value in the book. And there's a really remarkable chapter in Volume 3. John Stringer was the photographer for the autopsy. So Jeremy Gunn and Horn bring him in the National Archives, and they show him the pictures of the brain. And Stringer's reaction is really something. He's looking at this, and he's looking at this, and then he takes a look at the picture, and he looks at the numbers. He goes, wait a minute. He goes, this was done with a press pack. I didn't use a press pack when I took these pictures. Okay? And he says, and I didn't use this film either. This is Ansco. All right? I never used that film. All right? And he's actually denying that he took the pictures. All right? Now, and Doug builds upon this, and he makes a very solid case that there's no way in the world that those pictures are of Kennedy's brain. And believe me, when you read the transcript of Stringer, his rather, mystified reaction to this. You couldn't find a better witness than this guy to say somehow this autopsy was more than bungled. Somebody did some sabotage on this. So the question then becomes why? All right? All right? Or John Newman's great achievement about James Angleton splitting up Oswald's 201 file on the eve of the Mexico City charade so that certain information about Oswald would only be known to him, and he would be misleading everybody else. See, to me, this is real evidence. Barbara Bush writing this note to her family is, to me, it's not evidence. Right? Now, some of these people are still alive. Ruth and Michael Payne, Wesley Frazier, who I believe is a very suspicious character, which I've been writing about, the whole Curtin Roth story, which I think doesn't hold water. People like Gerald Hill, John Stringer, and Ann Goodpasture. When I was talking to Simpich, when I interviewed Eddie Lopez, I think it's a really funny story. When I first read the Lopez report, that overblown piece of malarkey, as Lucy says, I first encountered this woman's name. And I'm reading this thing, God, how could anybody overlook this woman? She does a lot of really bad things, like lying the hard way to Lopez. So when I interviewed Eddie, I said, Eddie, who is Ann Goodpasture? And this is the very first thing out of his mouth. She's a conniving, lying bitch, and if there was any justice in this world, she'd be in jail. Okay? I said, but Eddie, who is she? Okay, I can we thought of her. Who is the woman? I'd never heard of her before. And he says, she took care of Phillips's operations because Phillips was almost never there in Mexico City. He was always flying around to JM Wave, or Langley. So she handles his operations. So if you put that together with the fact that she deliberately sent this wrong picture up to CIA HQ, and the fact that Phillips sent the transcripts, which Tarasov did not recognize as being written on his typewriter, to himself under an assumed name, then you know why the picture is there and why the transcripts were not typed up by Tarasov. All right? So there's people like Ann Goodpasture, Pierre Fink, Thornton Boswell. So I believe, this kind of evidence is really valuable stuff. And there's a pretty good parallel for presenting a case on this, and that, of course, is the Jowers versus King civil suit. I don't know how many people have read about that, but there's a transcript of it in the book, The 13th Juror, in which justice was done, however delayed, but it was done. And a jury of 12 normal people said there was a conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King. But, on the other hand, what could a prosecutor do with Baker's work? Which leads to an important point. At this stage of the game, 47 years after the fact, I don't want to know whose name you are, or who you're accusing, okay, or what your mystifying plot is. I want to know one thing. What is your evidence? That's it. That's the bottom line in this case today. What is your evidence? And let everybody decide. And don't write 900 pages, or in Bugliosi's case, 2,700, telling me what the evidence is or what the evidence isn't. If you have to write a book that long, you really don't have much to say. Jim Douglas's book is less than 400 pages long. Philip Melanson's book is 214 pages long. And it's one of the most valuable books ever written on this case. Why could he get along with 200 pages where other people need 900 to say much less? And let me add another thing. One of the most discouraging things about this is this, the bottom line. Everybody and their mother did not kill John F. Kennedy. All right? If you read these books and take them seriously, everybody and their mother did. All right? It's almost like people are still remembering, nomenclature of the assassination cabal. All right? To say that George Bush, LBJ, the mob, the Cubans, H.L. Hunt, Murchison, and even the latest, the employees of the Texas School Book Depository, were part of a plot. I call that one the Truly Gang theory. Okay? They all killed Kennedy is for me to say nobody killed Kennedy. All right? I mean, the only thing worse than saying that Oswald killed Kennedy, or that Oswald killed Tippit, or Oswald took a shot at Walker, which he did not, is to present a picture to the public resembling the Torbeck document. You know, where no suspect is left out. It's just silly. One of the things that Jim Garrison did that was immediately buried when Blakey came in is he wrote a remarkable letter, a really wise and prescient letter to Jonathan Blackmer, who was the lawyer designated by Bob Tannenbaum to run the New Orleans investigation. And in this letter, he warned Blackmer that you could not rely on the usual investigative techniques to solve this case, because the crime scene evidence used to indict Oswald in both the Tippit murder and the Kennedy murder was so suspect that it would be demolished in court if you had to actually go by the real rules of evidence, which of course the Warren Commission did not. Okay? But it would never stand up under cross-examination. Therefore, the way to solve the case is that you had to find a paradigm that would be justified internally by the evidence, yet the overall design would fit the shape of the plot. Okay? Now, what did he mean by that? He meant this. Johnny Rosales did not control Ruth and Michael Payne. Okay? George Bush did not stop Jim Humes from dissecting the neck wound. Philippe Vidal and John Martino did not fake the pictures of Kennedy's brain. LBJ did not send a picture of a KGB agent to CIA HQ in order to match a false description. All right? H.L. Hunt did not provide that very long piece of paper that was taken down by the police at CSPD, which the only way Frazier could have had under his arm if he was King Kong. Okay? All right? And he did not produce a rifle that Oswald never ordered. How many of you know that? The so-called rifle found in the Texas School Book Depository does not match the order form either in length or in style. This is a point that David Bellin, if you read the testimony on this issue, tried to keep out of the record. It does not. You know, something that's never been explained. And Roy Truly did not escort Oswald around the Clinton-Jackson area in August of 1963. All right? So Garrison concluded that if your paradigm did not fit these circumstances, then you had to revise it until it did. And that was the only way that you would solve this case. And I actually believe it's possible to do this today. In other words, to present a comprehensive and cohesive case that fits these circumstances. You know, and then we have to, because unlike what Baker said last year, that to give the case currency, you had to read his book. I believe the best evidence giving this case currency is what has happened in this country. You know, again, I'm old enough to be around back then, okay, when Kennedy was president. You know, and the United States isn't anything like it was back then.
No.
You know, when Kennedy, you know, probably the best line in Manchester's whole book, when Kennedy arrives in Dallas, he says, we're really a nut country now. Well, the nuts have taken over. The teabaggers have taken over the country. All right? And it wouldn't have happened if the JFK case would not have occurred. Because the JFK case enabled the following assassinations, you know, of King and of RFK. And that resulted in the coming to power of Richard Nixon and the eventual decline of this country, socially, economically, and politically. Now, this is a message you won't find on the so-called liberal blogosphere, you know, like Daily Kos and HuffPo, etc. And in fact, they've been given instructions to keep the conspiracy stuff out. You know, but it's, unless this country ever develops a media that is going to be honest about its past, it will never be able to solve the problems of the present. You know, and unless we, the JFK community, stay on our guard, we run the risk of what happened to us, what happened in the 9/11 movement, which I don't know if you're familiar with people like Judy Wood and Morgan Reynolds and John Lear, etc. Okay, but it's one of the things that marginalized them rather in world record time. So we can't let our guard down, and we can't succumb to sensationalism. You know, we have the proper data and the background in our grasp. All we need is the opportunity. And sooner or later, when things get bad enough, which are well on their way to being bad enough, we're going to be needed, and we have to be ready. Okay?